Mm-hmm.
All right. I'm Mike Zwick. I'm here with a good friend, Pastor Steve Goode from Northside Baptist Church out of Greensboro, North Carolina. But Steve, you haven't always been a pastor. Is that right?
No. In fact, that's the last thing I wanted to be. 19 years old. I feel God's call in my life to go into ministry, but I spent my whole life as a preacher's kid, and people aren't nice. People aren't nice. And, some of the meanest people in the world are in the church. It just turned me off to church. I mean, we just went through a lot. There was a lot of things. My dad had a difficult ministry, but on the same token, he met so many good people along the way, but I didn't want to do it. I was like, no, I'm not doing it. So what I chose to do is I chose to do anything but.
Okay.
Which is funny because any pastor now that you talk to and say and tell them, hey, I want to go into ministry. I'm thinking about going into ministry. What advice do you have for me? The first thing they're going to say is, go do anything but. And if afterwards you're still empty, I think it's a real call.
Oh, wow.
so maybe by the that's kind of how I was. That's where I was. I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to do it. So I ended up doing anything but. I went in the Army. I spent some time out in Fort Sill, Lawton, Oklahoma, the Dust Bowl of the United States out there, getting hollered at by drill sergeants. And I did that, ended up getting injured during coming out of basic. I ended up getting an injury to my leg and then making me go home. I remember I was like, well, at least, in the midst of the Cold War, maybe I can just take it easy and chill. So I ended up doing several things. I ended up in security work. I ended up being a security guard at a mall, like Paul Blart. The only thing I regret about being a security guard like Paul Blart was that Segways were not yet around. Segways, so I couldn't ride a Segway. That would have been kind of cool.
All right.
But I had no Segways. So, but then that led me into police work. So I spent the next 11 years as a Greensboro police officer, and that's where God, as much as I thought that I was running from God and I was going somewhere I shouldn't be, or maybe I was literally running, just like Jonah, God was training me through that process. I realized He was making me actually get training and get the kind of things that in my tool belt, the skill set of my tool belt that I never could have gotten anywhere else. Police work exposes you to everything imaginable. And I'm not saying that watching autopsies helps you to be a better pastor. I'm not saying that. But I am saying that seeing death and seeing the depravity of man from the side of a police officer puts in perspective a lot of things in life, and for that matter, going into being a pastor. But anyway, and by the way, after you think, okay, so 10, 11 years later, so you went into ministry then? No. No. From there, it was on to IT. I'd started building computers from the ground up and started making label computers and started my own company. And so started creating things. And that was back during the age when nobody knew about computers pretty much. I mean, we were just getting into the DX and the SX systems and all of these, just networking, small business networking. So that was really good. The money was good. Everybody was afraid of Y2K at the moment.
Yeah.
So I was out there doing all the things for Y2K. And so it was a good time. It's just, I thought, well, okay, this is what I'm going to do the rest of my life. So 10 years goes by. I end up going to work for a defense contractor, and in the midst of all this, and I still was trying to stay away from ministry. I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to do it.
Yeah.
Nothing was really going right at home at the time. April and I were having all kinds of marriage problems on top of that, things that people couldn't see from the outside. We were good about hiding stuff sometimes. And so nobody was seeing it, but just so many difficulties. And it was because I was living outside of the will of God. because I was going to do anything I wanted to, but what God wanted me to do. And I already, I wasn't really seeking His will in my life. I was seeking what I wanted to do. And I remember as time went on, eventually my last contract with in computers, the last defense contract I was on began to come to a close. And God had just brought me under such conviction and taken me to a place where He's like, "You ready? You ready? Because you don't know it, but I was training you for all that time you thought you were running for me. Because now we're well past 22 years of time has gone by. Mm-hmm. He's trained me throughout that whole process, and he was getting me ready to go into ministry. So then the door finally opens, and so I end up entering ministry at that point. So all those things happen. Now, the cool part about all that time in police work, though, is it led to a lot of interesting cases and a lot of investigations that seem to have gained traction and have become interesting to people even now. It's been we're looking right now at 30 a case I had 32 years ago that now is still gaining notoriety on channels because people want to hear the story of this person, this serial killer, so to speak, who created so much chaos in his family.
Yeah, and I think somebody told me that the true crime is actually the number one search for a podcast right now. So people are interested in it. And the guy's name was Steve?
Tim?
Tim.
Okay, I know you don't want to say the last name because I'm thinking but Tim Boczkowski.
Okay.
But it's funny, what you're saying about true crime, the number one show for both single ladies or for that matter for women. Women watch 70% of true crime shows. Think about that for a minute. 70% of women. It's like, let's see what I want to do tonight. I want to watch something that's going to scare me and not make me want to go to bed tonight. That's the kind of shows they like watch. But they seem that they just love these kind of shows. So that is why series like Discovery ID, Oxygen, the Oxygen Crime Network, True Crime Network, all these. That's why all of these networks just blow up with women wanting to watch these shows. It just seems something of interest to them.
Yeah, and so the case happened 32 years ago, and we did talk about some of it on the last show. But you're going back up to Pennsylvania later this year, is that?
I am, and just summarily, what Tim did was Tim, while he was in Greensboro in 1990, mysteriously his wife died in a bathtub here in North Carolina. That night, we knew. I really did know what he had done. I did, and it was the biggest frustration of my life that over the course of the investigation, we could not find that one missing piece to make the case. And then some other things happened along the way. So anyway, in the course of his wife dying in 1990, he then moves up to Pennsylvania, near Pittsburgh, where he marries a young lady by the name of Mary Ann. Wonderful lady. In fact, she was looked so much like his first wife. It was almost both eerie and comforting to his kids, Randy, Sandy, and Todd.
Yeah.
It was not long after that, in 1994, that Tim's wife, Mary Ann, died in a jacuzzi in Pennsylvania, and the officers that night were not able to make the case that night, but were able to investigate to the point they made a case against Tim, and that started the chain of events that we needed to happen to get him back to the case here in North Carolina. So it took so long to further things to fall into place, but they finally fell into place to where we could bring him to trial here in North Carolina.
Were you surprised that he struck again?
I was. It probably was. There were a couple of moments in my career that were kind of moments that will always haunt me. Yeah. And I think when we were notified of what he had done in Pennsylvania, literally, the officers and the detective here in North Carolina were saying, the son of a gun did it again. Yeah. They literally were saying it. Now, I'm not going to say it like they said it. Mm-hmm. But they were saying he did it again. He struck again. He did it again. We were so close to being able to make a case against him here. And what happened was, in the course of the investigation, we knew how she died. I knew that from the marks, she had marks across her abdomen that were like, if you were to go into an old bathtub with a sliding glass door, you could see the track marks. And she had these marks across her abdomen. The first thing I did when I got to the hospital, I remember the night that they brought Elaine into Wesley Long Hospital in Greensboro, is I was asking the EMS guys, I was like the EMTs, I'm like, hey, did y'all have the thumper on her? The thumper. The thumper, by the way, was an artificial CPR device we used to put on people, and it would artificially make the noise, it would thump. It would keep their heart beating, and it would do everything for us. And they said, we never put that on her. I'm like, okay, so where do those marks come from on her, across her abdomen there? And they were looking at me like, we don't know. It had nothing to do with us. Yeah. So that kind of threw up a question mark in my mind, because there were just a few things that were out of place the night that Elaine died. And when I eventually got Tim down to the police station, he agreed to come down. He was very cold at the moment. He really didn't show a whole lot of emotion, and it was that surreal moment where you can't even process what you've just done. Mm-hmm. And that's the moment really when you can get people to talk in investigations like this. It's that moment where you think almost like, man, I've gotten by with this. I've been able to get by with this. And I tell you, man, there's something in every heart that has just got that evil piece that can be activated by our actions. In fact, it reminds me of Jeremiah 17:9 when it says, the heart of man is wicked and deceitful above all things, and no man can know the human heart except God, because that's how it was made to be. God is the only one who can fix the human heart. And in Tim's case, he had activated something in himself that was starting a chain of events in his life. And this still completely blows my mind that a human being can do this. But I always have to remember, it didn't start at the night that this happened. But we have to go back to Genesis 1 through 11 to know a little bit, because this raises the question about, how, why is man so evil? Why is there suffering in the world? But we have to go back and look. Genesis 1 through 11 shows us that there was a time in the creation of the world that the world was good. There was a moment, but it even says, God said that, man, all he created, it was good. Yeah. He just it was good. And it was perfect, and it was full of life, and it was full of the Spirit of God. And then Satan, in his attempt to ruin creation, tempts at Eve and starts a chain of events that go to the fall of Adam. And at the fall of Adam, from the moment there was the fall of Adam, when sin entered the world, we were no longer that creation that was good. It was gone. It was gone. We then go now back to the Jeremiah 17:9 creation, where our hearts are wicked and evil and up to mischief, and wanted to do this. And so fast forward to 1990 and me sitting before Tim Boczkowski. And if I could put that from a law enforcement perspective, people out there might be wondering, why is there evil in the world? Why are there monsters in the world like what Tim Boczkowski did? Why is there this monster in the world? It's because it goes back to Genesis chapters 1 through 11, the creation, the fall, and now the groaning for God to come and return and to restore this imperfect world. That's where we are. We're groaning. Come on, man. We want something more. So when you wonder how could Tim do this, well, let me tell you something. You run with your heart's desires and watch where it leads you. Run with your hearts. Just run wherever your heart leads you, because if you run where your heart leads you, I'll tell you right now, you're going to end up in a sinful place. And man is capable of so much evil when God is absent from his life. Man can do anything evil. Romans 3:23, Romans 6:23, all these verses speak to evil and sin and all that. So we know what's possible separate from God. So when I looked at Tim and I realized he's just killed his wife, even that night, and I've seen what he's done, and he's able to lie. And in that surreal moment, I call it the surreal moment because it hasn't registered yet what he's even done really in his mind. And all this planning he's done, it's happened. He's executed his evil. He's murdered. And now he's in that place where Cain was, where, the blood may be crying from the ground, but now it's almost like unreal to him. And as he's watching things unfold, and he's lying to me about what happened to Elaine that night. As I ask him about those track marks, by the way, he can't really give me a good explanation. He starts talking about some things about how he held her over the tub to try to get the water out of her because she was submerged underwater. The problem with all of these things he was telling me, he's trying to claim she was submerged underwater. Brenda Vance, my assist car that night, was on the scene and said the tub was bone dry. Oh, really? Have you ever watched how long it takes a tub to dry? Yeah. After you've taken the water out, you drain the water. It doesn't. The water doesn't go away. It just sits there and sits there and sits there, and eventually it may evaporate, but it takes a long time. And he's also saying he pulled her out of the tub. There's no sign of water outside of the tub, so nothing's adding up. That's what led us to think. Okay, so when he pushed her over that part of the tub and held her down, he held her down to the point that she literally asphyxiated. She stopped. She literally was suffocated to death, and that's what happened. He also claimed that she'd been drinking like a fish, that he'd been drinking and been carrying on. When we had the toxicology report come back from the ME, the medical examiner, her blood alcohol was 0. 0. Now, from a woman who was alleged to been drinking since noon that day, Tim's testimony, that now he's saying, now all of a sudden we find out toxicology. So he lied about that. Every step of the way, he tried to lie his way out of what he had done. But here's the problem that we ran into. The minute that the medical examiner sent us the report of what had happened, the medical examiner ruled the death unable to determine.
Jeez.
Okay. North Carolina. Let's give you an example. In North Carolina, you try to bring a case before a grand jury and then subsequently before a jury for first-degree murder and have an ME's report of unable to determine. Guess what's going to happen? We're going to lose our case. Yeah. And then comes into play.
They're going to be unable to determine a guilty verdict, huh?
Yeah, exactly. Reasonable doubt. Right. Reasonable doubt. Right. Okay. Reasonable doubt.
And what I've heard, and you may know this, is that people have said that there are many times when you're a police officer where you know somebody's committed a crime, but you can't prove it beyond reasonable doubt.
Oh, and there's nothing that drives you crazier because your common sense is telling you exactly what happened. Your common sense, it can tell you exactly, but you have to be able to prove it. And we knew it. And if we did pursue the case, here's what would have happened. If we pursued the case against him, if the DA even would have been crazy enough to pursue it with that kind of an ME report, then he got found not guilty. There's something in our legal system called double jeopardy. double jeopardy is that you can't be brought before the jury for the same crime twice. Or that's protection, that's some of the protections under the law. You can't bring that person's good for life. In other words, they if they're found not guilty for that crime, they can't be brought again and then be tried again for the same crime because it's double jeopardy.
So an example of that would probably be the O.J. Simpson case.
Yes.
After O.J. Simpson was found not guilty, he actually came out and wrote a book called, I think it was If I Did It.
Yeah.
And he basically told exactly how he committed the murders.
Exactly.
And
exactly.
They couldn't do anything, right? I mean,
not a word. Nobody could do anything about it. So OJ's a good example of someone who got away with murder. Literally got away with murder. Of course, what goes around comes around. Where is he now for the rest of his life?
Yeah.
So you have with Tim, we were stuck. That's why when this case went to Pennsylvania and when he killed that second time, it opened up a whole nother can of worms. There is something that never came out in the course of the investigation until much later. And this is something that not even his children would have ever known. And that's how Tim's brother-in-law died. Tim's brother-in-law, this is Elaine, his first wife's husband. Excuse me, his first wife's brother. He died somehow mysteriously in his 20s in a shower or in a bathtub in Texas. So there are a lot of open questions there about how the brother died. And so regardless, Tim is in prison now in Pennsylvania, and he's never going to get out. But this, the details of this, all these little pieces. And by the way, if the Oxygen Network's running a series right now called "Living with a Serial Killer," and there is actually an episode on Tim Boczkowski. It's the episode that's currently running. It's on demand. That they can see this. They can see this step by step. There's also another one out called My Murder Story. It airs on Discovery ID. Once again, it spells out the case. And there's one other one that came out a number of years ago called The Devil You Know. There's an episode called Devil of a Dad. And all three of these episodes. But I will say this. I'm not supposed to rank things or rate shows.
Sure.
But I'll say this: the one that's currently out, the crew that did this last episode, this last series, has done the best job. I think you've even said it. They just did a great job with it. They they told the story. They probably told the story in a most interesting way that I think I've heard thus far. My wife even mentioned that when she watched it. Which time I said, our insurance policy's up to date, honey. No, but it was done. The story was so well told. But I think so they kind of spelled out everything and showed everything in kind of the right light. Which sometimes you kind of get nervous when you do these SME work on these discovery shows, or for that matter, any documentary, because you're like, man, I hope they handle this the right way. They tell the story right. But it looks like in this particular series, they told the story accurately.
I know you're in the ministry now. You're at Northside Baptist Church of Greensboro. I've been there several times. Love it. You have a great ministry with the homeless. But when we're talking about this, do you ever miss the police work?
I miss the people that I used to work with, and I'm saying that I miss the streets the most. But here's the cool part about, I'm a pastor now, and this is where God's called me, and I'll be probably for the rest of my life. I'll be in pastoring, but I get to be on the streets, and as a chaplain with the police department in Greensboro, I still get to see the streets. I still get to work with people, and that's people on all levels. From alcoholics to meth addicts to the people in my neighborhood, some of which are both.
I still
still get to do it. So yeah. But do I miss it? I do. The officers that I get to work around give me my fix.
Okay.
Help me to not miss it as much. I would have retired in 2016 with 30 years. I would have retired. And so, was 16 a little bit depressing for me? Yeah. But no, God's good. I mean, I do miss it.
And I guess one of the things that I've heard from people who were police officers or in the FBI or even attorneys is that they say sometimes you can get to the point where you just don't trust anybody, because what I've heard people say is that you're seeing the worst of people.
You are.
Did you ever deal with that? Or?
Well, yeah, but I think one of the problems I had in the latter part of my career is that there was a deep inward desire to see the best in people.
Okay.
That deep inward desire in me to see the best in people, to see people for what they can become,
sure,
would have probably been the thing that got me killed.
Okay.
So, I want so bad to see. I want a person to. I understand Jeremiah 17:9 says everybody's evil, so all hearts are evil. But I wanted to see that. Did it make me kind of cynical about certain things? Mm-hmm. Yeah, it did. Mm-hmm. But that's something that didn't go away overnight either.
Yeah.
Even it's funny. Even as a minister, I'm not around. You would think, well, you're not around people that cuss all the time. But in law enforcement, you're around people that, let's just say, they don't all speak with high and mighty words. They sometimes have ways to say things that have a lot of 4 letters in them. Yeah. And when I came out of law enforcement, and I remember April and I, my wife, we'd be watching a movie together, and a word would pop off on a movie we're watching. April would look at me like I just said it. It's like, she'd give me that look, that wife look, and and I'm like, before I could even react, I'm like, what? It took me a while to recondition myself to even hear certain things, because they were so much a part of my day-to-day existence, in my career. I was around bad language and filth and so much that you become desensitized to it. So those parts there, it took a while to reignite my sensitivity and hear things like my wife was hearing them at moments, but it took a while to get that back in.
But I'm sure over your career, you also had some opportunities where maybe you saw the best in people as well.
You did. I mean, I can think of examples where you saw the return of large sums of money, or you saw people risk their lives in to help someone, and you got to see those kind of scenarios. And so there were moments where you saw the better side of humanity, so to speak. But it did boil down to one thing, and I firmly believe this, that our evil in this world and is what real evil and true evil is. We sometimes say that evil is the presence of God, a presence of the devil. The evil is simply the presence of the devil. And I think, though, that evil more or less, it goes along the lines of true evil, right? Real deep, dark evil is the absence of living with the presence of God in our life. That's evil.
Yeah.
To live apart from and live ignoring God and ignoring all that He shows us. Now, the truth is, God really is still there, because Romans 1:18 tells us that what we do is we see the evidence of God in everything around us, and yet we ignore Him. And we want to literally discount what He's doing, discount his activity in our life. So it's that absence, not living like the presence of God is in our life, is what sends us to those dark places.
Yeah, and you had mentioned a couple of verses that really spoke to me. Romans 3:23, which is that all have sinned and come short of the glory of God, and also Romans 6:23, where it says that the wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life through Christ Jesus our Lord. Yes. And when I look at Romans 3:23, when I realize my own sinfulness, and when I realize even you and I both, I mean, our own sinful nature, I think many times it enables us to give grace to other people. And you actually, when you talking about you miss being on the streets, you're working with the homeless right now.
Well, there's my fix. There's my fix.
Okay.
I miss the streets, but what has replaced it and where God's used it. You know, remember God was training me all that time before, is that now I get to work with a homeless on a daily basis. We get to be on the streets. We get to see them coming into the walls of the church. I can tell you about stories of successes, and I can tell you about stories of failures or disappointments that I may have had along the way. But it's been neat to watch God work in the hearts and minds of those even that are what we call the least of these, those that don't have much, and watch what God can do even in their life, and watch them come to a saving knowledge of Christ.
Yeah, so and many times, you know, people say, well, you know, the world will ignore these people. Yeah. And then the world will just, you know, say, hey, go to the local mission or whatever it is. But unfortunately, many of the churches ignore these people as well.
They do. It's too easy to stay within the walls of the church and to almost, you know, especially, you know, hey, you don't want to invite homeless people into our church because they'll make the pews dirty. Or they'll make the pews pew. You know, you just that. You know, we think along those lines, which is hypocritical and right out of James. You know, in other words, we want to sit them in the back, out of the way, and so no, it's that's a big piece of this. A lot of churches have that kind of backwards, and they like their comfortable churches, their comfortable settings. On the same token, I've seen how God can work mightily in the life of churches that will just open their doors up to anyone, but they have to understand it's going to be dirty.
Sure.
It's going to be at times stressful because you're going to have incidents. You're going to have things that happen sometimes. You're going to have to work through some stuff because, like I said, ministry is, if you're doing it right, it's messy. But it's neat to see how God can work in those situations.
Yeah, and it says, what you have done for the least of these, my brethren, you have done it unto me.
Absolutely.
And so your show, it's on the Oxygen channel right now?
Oxygen channel. It airs on demand. And if you look on the Oxygen Network schedule, you'll be able to find it. But it's Living with a Serial Killer. And you're looking for an episode called the Tim Boczkowski. And trust me, if just saying the name, you're thinking, how do I spell that? Yeah. Trust me, if you go to Oxygen Network and look up Living with a Serial Killer, you'll see that name.
You'll see that name.
Okay, right. It'll stick out.
So Pastor Steve from Pastor Steve Goode, with an E on the end, from Northside Baptist Church in Greensboro, North Carolina. If you're ever in the area, they'd love to have you. They're a loving and a welcome church, and they'll make you feel right at home. So thanks a lot, Pastor Steve.
Thank you. Thank you, buddy.
Good, man. Good, man. Good.